and welcome to this introduction to Cableguys Curve 2. This versatile and powerful synth is named in honour of the curve editor at the top, which provides precise and intuitive control over waveform shapes for 3 oscillators, each of which can crossfade between 2 different waves, 4 powerful and flexible LFOs, and 3 equally powerful and flexible envelopes, which are all tied together via the modulation matrix at the bottom of the single-page interface. Of course, the best place to start with a new synth is usually to explore the presets. So let's switch to the Preset Library tab. A wide range of factory presets are provided, split over multiple pages. Up at the top right, we find a filter section, which we can use to narrow the search results. You can choose from a list of instrument types, or search for a specific sound design, or search preset names. Presets can be rated, so you can easily find your favourites again. And presets with a low rating can be excluded from your search. Notice the 4 macro knobs just below the filter section. These are duplicates of the macro knobs on the main edit page, and their name and function changes depending on the preset selected. Sound designers can assign these to control a single synth parameter, or multiple parameters, all with different ranges and directions. And they can often have a profound effect on the sound, so make sure you try twisting these knobs when auditioning a preset. The first 2 controls are hardwired to the modulation wheel and to channel aftertouch, respectively, while the 4th is often assigned to control unison detune and called fatness. Curve 2 doesn't require an internet connection and will work just fine if your DAW is not hooked up. If you do have internet access, however, you can optionally sync your preset library with a central database via the menu at the top right. When it's finished, you'll have a wide range of extra presets available that have been shared by the user base. Okay, let's switch back to the main editor and create a new preset via the menu at the top right. The resulting patch has oscillator 1 set to use wave 1, which is displayed above in the waveform editor, and has a simple sine wave shape. Sure enough, if I play some notes, we hear a simple sine wave patch, and I can adjust the level of the sine wave using the oscillator volume knob. The waveform for wave 1 can be edited, however, by dragging nodes around, by clicking to add new nodes, or double-clicking to delete them. I can also right-click a node to toggle to a much sharper, tighter curve, or no curve at all, or back to a gentle curve again. And placing curved nodes close together allows a very precise control over the resulting shape. Holding the Shift key allows you to lasso multiple nodes and move them all together, or stretch them around in various ways by dragging the edges of the box. Notice the background displays a histogram-style graph representing the harmonics generated by the current waveform. Steeper gradients and sharper edges will result in more high harmonics, and therefore a brighter sounding waveform. Preset buttons are provided for the classic synth waveforms. Notice the triangle wave has only odd harmonics, which tail off quite quickly, while the sawtooth wave contains all harmonics right up to the Nyquist limit. The square wave is back to just odd harmonics, but like the sawtooth, these extend all the way to the system's upper limits, and the resulting sound is much brighter than the triangle wave. Of course, analog synths rarely produce square waves as perfect as this one, so let's drag the nodes around a bit to create slopes instead of flat tops, and add some nodes to create curves instead of straight lines. And notice the more asymmetrical my waveform shape becomes, the more even harmonics creep back into the spectrum. Okay, my goal is to create a simple pad sound, so I'm going to click the first waveform selector for oscillator 2 and choose wave 1 again, and do the same for oscillator 3. And I might turn them all down a bit to compensate for the extra volume. And now let's detune the waves against each other by a few cents to add the characteristic sweeping sound of multiple oscillators drifting in and out of phase with one another. I might also choose to tune one of my oscillators up an octave for a brighter sound, and to pan a couple of oscillators hard left and right to add some stereo width. The result sounds thicker and more interesting than the single square wave did. But we can take this concept further by turning up the fatness knob in the macro section, which is assigned to control the unison detune parameters below. Sure enough, turning this knob up adds a super rich detune effect, as we've now duplicated our 3 oscillators with 7 sets of unison voices, giving us a total of 21 detuned square waves. I'm finding about halfway up gives me the kind of rich sound I want from my pad. The fatness macro is also assigned to control the master preset volume parameter at the bottom right to help stop the levels getting too hot, but you can still adjust this parameter manually if required. Of course, the volume envelope is all wrong for a pad sound, so let's take a look at the envelope section. At first glance, the volume envelope looks like a classic ADSR type. And sure enough, I can turn up the attack time to create a gentle, slow attack stage, and adjust the decay to control how fast it falls back again, and the release to control how quickly the sound decays after releasing the key. However, the usual sustain control is not there. Instead, we have a loop knob, which initially doesn't seem to do anything. So let's press the little magnifying glass symbol over to the right, which will display the envelope shape in the curve editor at the top. Now we can see a graph showing the slow attack stage, and the decay stage, which ramps from maximum back down to the sustain level, which you can adjust by dragging the node at the start of the sustain loop section. However, we can also add further nodes, just as we did for the oscillator shape earlier. I'll create a gentle undulating sine wave type shape. And the sustain stage of the envelope now behaves more like an LFO, with the rate controlled by the loop knob. The attack and decay stages can also be edited in the same way. I'll add a node to create a curved attack stage instead of a straight line. This type of shape can make a pad sound feel more responsive, while still retaining the softness of the slow attack. And I might also create a gentle S shape for the decay stage. So let's add some filtering. I'll start by choosing a clean high-pass filter for filter 1. Then I'll tune it to the low mid-range to remove low frequencies that might get in the way of bass parts. Then maybe warm up the sound a touch by adding some resonance to create a little boost in that region. Now I'll pick a clean notch filter for filter 2. But I don't want this to remain static. I want to hear the notch sweep around, so I'm going to modulate it with an LFO. The first step is to choose a waveform. I'll pick the first one I haven't used yet, which is wave 2, and I'll click the magnifying glass symbol to show it in the editor above. Linking the LFO to the filter is done via the modulation matrix below. Modulation sources are listed vertically to the left, with destinations listed horizontally along the top. So if I locate filter cutoff 2, then drop down 4 slots and turn up the value in the box, we're now modulating filter 2 with LFO 1. Let's look at the LFO 1 parameters again. It's set to beat retrigger mode with a length of 1 bar, so the actual speed of modulation depends on the project tempo. I'm going to switch instead to the Hertz retrigger mode, which runs at a constant rate regardless of project tempo, more like a traditional LFO. Note that modulation rates can be set well up into the audio frequency range if you want. But in this case, I'm going to go the other way and set a slow modulation rate for a gentle sweeping effect. Okay, now I'll add more modulation from LFO 2. Again, I'll enable it by choosing a wave, and I'll click to view it in the editor above. Now let's link it to a parameter via the matrix. This time I want to modulate the oscillator's volumes, so let's locate the oscillator volume destination at the top. Notice there's only one of these, despite having 3 oscillators, But if I drop down to the LFO2 row and hover over the field, a pop-up appears allowing separate modulation depths to be set for each. In this case I want to modulate them all the same, so it's quicker and easier to ignore the pop-up and edit the main matrix field instead. Now we hear the volume of the patch gently swelling and dropping to silence once each bar, as the volume is modulated by the tempo synced sine wave from LFO2. I want a more rhythmic modulation however, so I'll clear the wave with the trash can button, and then turn on steps drawing mode next to it. I can now quickly and easily draw in hard-edged modulation to create step sequencer style patterns and create a classic transgate effect. While steps mode feels like tweaking a step sequencer, we're actually just adding normal sharp-edged nodes, so we can drag them around to create diagonal lines, or right-click to soften the edges of the steps. Of course, we can also change the LFO rate so the sequence runs faster or slower. But notice that the sequence restarts for every note I play. So if I arpeggiate a chord, each note of the chord is modulated differently. And if I play out of time with the drums, the sequence runs out of time also. In this case, it might be better to switch the LFO to beat synced mode instead. The beat and hertz synced modes both ignore your playing and stay locked to the host position instead. So all voices of a chord are modulated in sync, and the modulation is always the same every time you press play, even if you play from halfway through the song or halfway through a bar. Now it doesn't matter how sloppy my playing is, the transgate effect stays locked firmly to the beat regardless. Okay, so let's add some performance control via the macro knobs. First, notice the level parameters for the first two LFOs. If I turn down the level for LFO2, I can scale down the transgate effect and remove it entirely with the level set to 0. Now I'll click the edit symbol in the macro section to edit the macro assignments. We now see a vertical column for each of the 4 controls listing their assignments. And we can see the default 4 fatness assignments for the 4th knob. If I drag from the first slot of the first macro and drop onto the LFO2 level parameter, I've now assigned that parameter and I can set the depth with the field to the right. And now turning up the first macro knob introduces the transgate effect. This knob is hardwired to the mod wheel, so I can now use the mod wheel to fade in the volume modulation as part of my performance. While we're here, I'm also going to assign the second macro to control the cutoff for the high-pass filter loaded into filter 1, and also to control resonance. And I'll turn down the depth of these assignments a bit. And I can now use channel aftertouch to introduce a resonant high-pass filter sweep. Of course, these macro knobs can also be automated, as can all the other controls on the interface. So you can still incorporate these effects even if you don't have a keyboard that sends aftertouch, or a physical modulation wheel. Before I close the editor, let's rename the first 2 macros T-Gate and HPF. Okay, I'm going to call this preset finished and save it via the menu at the top right. And the preset will be added to the library, where we can rename it, or tag it with a category, or give it a rating, or delete it. You also have the option to share your preset with the rest of the user base, in which case it'll be uploaded and become public next time you sync. But even if you choose to keep your presets private, syncing will back up your presets to your account, and they will all then be available on any other internet-connected workstation, and can be easily restored if you reinstall your operating system or buy a new computer. That's all for this video. Look out for the advanced tutorial, which will dig a bit deeper with some more complex examples. Thanks for watching.